This video is a video response assimilating the information found and all of the information that will be in this video is referenced in a article which was published online in July 25th, 2005 in the Harm Reduction Journal. The authors were Joseph Garevich, Erica Boxkal, Lajos Farkas, and Zoltan Danix. The name of the article is called A Case Report, Pavlovian Conditioning as a Risk Factor of Heroin Overdose Death. And in this video response, I'm going to attempt to answer 3 questions. So those questions are how I would explain the findings of this research to one of my clients who's dealing with an opiate addiction. What are the implications of this article for working with people who are suffering from opiate addiction? And then what practical advice that I could offer those people based on this research. So to start off with, the article talks about how they're going to discuss something that is not necessarily a rare occurrence, but it hasn't been studied very much. It's not well talked about. So we all know, first of all, that heroin overdoses can be fatal, and that fatal heroin overdoses happen a lot of times either with heroin that has been adulterated with deadlier substances, or also by heroin users who, for instance, shoot up too much because they didn't know how much they were shooting up, or by shooting up by having a period of withdrawal and then returning to use, and then their tolerance has gone down because of their the time period they've gone without ingesting the substance, and so they end up using more than their body can handle because they're using it the same volumes as they used before. But what this article shows is that there is actually a third thing that can happen that has more to do with environment than anything else. And the way that we know this is that we know of many heroin overdoses, fatal heroin overdoses that happened where the concentration of the heroin in the heroin addict's body at the time of death was the same or smaller than they were accustomed to normally. So one example of this, I guess, would be, if somebody is used to shooting up in their house, what will happen, this is similar when we talk about Pavlovian, what we're talking about is Pavlov was a researcher who realized that he could make dogs salivate based on environmental cues like the sound of a click when it was paired with a treat, and after a time he could take the treat away and then he could make the click, and then that alone would cause it. So one example of what can happen is that your body has a reaction based on where you are when you're about to use. So if I'm using at my house all the time and I go to shoot up, my body knows, because of where I'm at, that it needs to produce chemicals that will increase my tolerance, basically, because it knows what's about to happen. It's already revved up and ready to go. Whereas if I go get some heroin and I'm going through really bad withdrawals, and so I decide to shoot up in like the trap house where I don't usually shoot up, my body doesn't associate that place with me actually shooting up, and so it's not producing all of the different chemicals and the tolerance capabilities, and so I can shoot up less and overdose. So there are a few ways that we know this, a couple of interesting ways. One way is because we experiment with rats, and the rats overdose when they're in the new place, but they don't overdose in their expected place based on the same amount of heroin. Then we also know this through interviews with people who have overdosed. So 7 out of 10 people who overdose, they report overdosing in new places. They're not in their expected place. And there was also some research performed on heroin addicts that returned the same results. And then there was one very interesting study where 76 heroin addicts at an ER, 54 of them came into the ER due to overdose on heroin, and 22 of them came in to deal with non-urgent or urgent medical stuff, but non-overdose care, who had injected heroin an hour earlier. And every single one of the people who came in with non-overdose but medical urgency, every single one of them had shot up in their expected place, whereas over 50% of the ones who came in overdosing had shot up somewhere besides the usual place that they shot up. And then finally, it ends with an example of a man who was a regular IV user, heroin user for 4 years. He was accustomed to injecting with his wife at home, and then one day, after 4 years, he told his wife, I'm going to detox. And he told his wife he's going to work and he's not going to buy any heroin, but he broke his promise. He ended up going to the heroin dealer. He got the heroin and he went and shot up in a public outhouse, and he died. And they, figured out that it wasn't from the heroin itself. He had the same amount as he usually had in his system. It was actually less, I think. It was like 0.05 nanograms. They interviewed several people who bought the same stuff from the same dealer at the same time. None of them had any problems. They didn't find any kind of adulterants in the heroin. The only difference after 4 years was that it was in a public outhouse rather than at his own house. So, primarily one thing to take from this is that obviously there is never any safe heroin injection. But if a client of mine was to decide that they wanted to go back out and use, I would want them to be armed with this knowledge, so that they know that at least if they do decide to use, their chance of overdose is reduced significantly if they are always with somebody, or at least their chance of dying from overdose is reduced if they're always with somebody. So obviously, getting some heroin, going home, and using it doesn't keep you safe from overdosing. It keeps you safer from overdosing based on, the environmental conditioning. But you could still get it and have it been adulterated or just, dangerously handled so that it was dirty and it causes an infection. But it's especially important to remember that if you're going out, you're going to shoot up in an outhouse or something like that, make sure you have somebody with you in case this phenomenon happens to you, because you could die from injecting the same amount of heroin that you've used for years because it's in a new place. That's it. Thank you.